the revolution never occurred. And in fact, I frequently talk to young filmmakers. The young filmmakers, they'll say, well, I realize my film is not that good, but I didn't have the money. And I'll say, well, first of all, it doesn't cost that much money. And secondly, all the things that make it crappy are the things that didn't cost you any money, right. Like the script.
Right.
And so I'm really kind of like flummoxed for an explanation as to why we don't have more films, why we don't have more brilliant films done by people who previously would have been shut out of Hollywood, would not have been able to make films, but now can make films because the technology is available, and it's not happening. We're not having that revolution. We have a lot of films. We don't have a lot of great films. So maybe somebody will come along and explain that to me. But we have a lot of... actually, what's gotten better in the last 15 years is TV, especially cable TV, especially serial TV. So a lot of things that would have been feature films before are now series.
Right, and
the place to be right now is in TV, not in film.
Right, I've noticed that a lot of A-listers are doing more TV series than they are movies, and they're turning out to be phenomenal
exactly.
series.
And 15 years ago, people would have said the miniseries is dead. Well, most of these, what we call these TV series, are actually miniseries because they go 13 hours. They're 13-hour miniseries is what they are, and then and some of them go on 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons. So they're really 70-hour miniseries because they continue a story for that long. They're really amazing feats of writing, among other things. And that's a format that we didn't have before. That's not that closely related to the cheapness of the technology. It's just something that happened because people became accustomed to time shifting and watching things out of sequence and watching things all at once, and So that's the major thing, especially in horror. That's the major change, is that there are these horror franchises that wouldn't have existed in past eras.
Josh, anyone else?
I mean, I guess one of my questions is, when you look at a movie, how do you break it down into what makes a good movie, like the pillars? I mean, just when you're looking at the storyline, the plot, the development.
I like any movie. To me, a movie can be anything except boring.
Okay.
So the reason I'm a champion of so many movies that are thought of as bad is that if a movie is made with genuine intent, even if the execution fails, a lot of times the movie will be fascinating just because of the passion that's behind it.
Okay.
So I don't like lists of what's the best movie or what's the worst movie.
Right.
I'm more into, what's the movie that gave me an experience I've never had before? What's the movie that makes you feel like, the first time you saw Blue Velvet or something like that, where, boy, I've never seen a scene like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like right in the middle of Blue Velvet, there's a scene where Dennis Hopper goes to I think it's a brothel. I'm not sure what it is, but he goes to Dean Stockwell's place, and Dean Stockwell sings, and there are all these crazy people around, and nothing happens in that scene. Nothing happens.
Nope.
And yet you're scared the whole time. You are scared throughout that scene.
Yeah.
You're probably anticipating.
Okay, well, there's a scene that's never been duplicated before or since. That's just an amazing scene. It's an amazing cinematic moment that couldn't be done any other way. So whether you like Blue Velvet or hate Blue Velvet, and there are people who on both sides of the equation, there's an experience you've never had before. So it's moments like that in film that I think make film special and make the experience. The reason people hate critics is critics are always ranking things.
Right.
And that's not why people go to films. That's not why you go for the experience. They don't really want to know whether you think it's, most critics can only do two things. They can say it's good or it's bad,
Yeah.
Right.
And people don't like that. It's like there's more to it. It's more. If critics were honest, then 90% of the reviews would say, "Well, it's good and bad." Because that's what 90% of the movies are.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
They overpraise and they overcriticize, and so as a result, nobody trusts them.
Right.
Because, when I go see a movie, the intent I'm going to is this movie is, it's an escape. To get away from the mundane life, escape to a new world with new characters. And, if it doesn't deliver that, then you're just kind of like, this movie ain't that great.
It certainly ought to be more interesting than your own life, right?
Right. Yeah,
Exactly,
definitely.
yeah.
That's why I'm going to go see the movie.
So,
even if it ought to be more interesting than your own life, even if you're George Clooney.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. So, that's very cool.
But one thing I've noticed about, because I'm always a horror movie fan, and I love all the old horror movies, no matter what grade they are. And it just, like, today's horror movies, it seems like it's just an overrun thing. It's just like, just shock them and gore. That's all we want. Like, when I watch the Human Centipede movies, it's just like, number 2, just like, it made me cringe. I had to walk out of the room a couple times because there's some stuff I was like, I feel like they've gone a little bit too far. It's like, I don't want to see something like that. I want to see the kind of the corniness. Once you start getting too realistic, I feel like you lost me. I don't want to watch it because it's too gross. Do you feel that some movies have gone too far?
Well, you have to understand that at any given time, 90% of what's out there is crap.
Right.
So that's true today. That was true in the 90s. That was true in the 80s. That was true in the 70s. And so we forget what came along that had a brief life and then disappeared. No one remembers it. Of course, with the internet, somebody remembers everything.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But in terms of the public at large remembering films, we remember the good ones and we forget the bad ones. The advent of torture porn, gross out porn, it actually doesn't have much of a shelf life because it's just like, let me give you a parallel to it. In the early '80s, there was a type of movie when you could do anything with violence and still get an R rating. You couldn't do anything with sex. They were pretty hard on sex, and they would give you an X rating or an NC-17 rating. But in the early '80s, anything could be done with violence. They really never gave you an NC-17 for violence, and so some of the less skilled filmmakers, and there was one particular movie I remember called Nightmare, and Nightmare was a serial killer movie told from the point of view of the serial killer with a point of view camera. So he raged up and down the East Coast, killing people in horrible ways, and you saw most of these in graphic detail, and you were supposed to sympathize with the serial killer. Well, that movie never made a dime. That movie lost. They thought they would put that in the grindhouses in Times Square, and that movie was extremely unpopular because they violated every rule of filmmaking, that's existed since the beginning of time, which is that an audience will not identify with a person like that. And so, so it doesn't matter how you could have had that same movie about that person, but had a balancing hero or avenger who would give the audience someone to identify with, and you could have made that into a viable movie. But somebody who didn't understand made the movie and lost all their money. In a similar way, most of these gross out movies that are purely based on torture effects, gore effects, including the original Gore film, Blood Feast. It made money because of its shock value at the time it came out. It's virtually unwatchable today. I mean, we watch it because of its historical value,
right?
You know, and I love Herschel Gordon Lewis. He's a friend of mine, and I've told him this, and I've said, you know, Herschel, what you're going to be remembered for is you did it first, you know, but you know, you didn't shoot any close-ups. You locked down the camera. You know, you didn't even do any medium shots. You know, it's like it's not a good movie. You know, the actors were horrible. You know, it's like so that's not a movie that people want to watch. It's a movie that has historical value. And if you make a movie just to do the gore effects, just to do the gross out effects, just to do torture, the movie's not going to last. It might have a brief vogue at a certain type of fan convention, you know, where people would want to party in a certain way, but it's not going to. It might have a life, a half-life on YouTube, you know, but it's not going to last. Movies that don't have story and don't have a story structure and don't satisfy our innate need for you know, for story are not going to work, and they're not going to last. So if you know, Human Centipede doesn't have much of a story. It's basically what it is. Right. It's basically for the shock value. I mean, it's not gonna, people aren't going to be talking about that movie for very long.
I just feel like that's whenever, because I believe that's a foreign film, and it seems like foreigners go for more gore shock than maybe we do over here.
Oh, no, I would say...
Really?
No, I would say your average gore fanboy in America is perfectly capable of doing anything like that, yeah. You know, there were lots of... It's true, there were lots of sort of gross German films, German independent films in the 80s and 90s, but you know, the horror genre is owned by America. You'll see you know, there's Scandinavian horror films, there's German horror films, there's Spanish horror films, but there's Japanese do a good job with horror films, but many of them are derived from forms that were created in America. Okay. There are very few. There's a few genres that originate in Asia. The ghost hopping movies. Right. Ghost hopping, is that what you call it? I'm going to get it wrong. But there are some Chinese, there are some Asian horror stories that are original, but 90% of horror comes from. I'm going to say it this way: 80% comes from America, 10% comes from Germany, because Germany made the first horror films in the 20s. But those stories, some of those stories came from England. I guess you have to give England 10%. 10% Germany, 10% England, and then 70% America, and 10% the rest of the world.
All right, Josh.
So, I mean, I was watching, like, going back and watching some YouTube of, like, God stuff. I find that very funny. I mean, was that really fun to make and go through and find the clips? Or was that
I have some friends in Dallas who monitor religious TV, and they monitor it to check for consumer fraud. Okay. And when widows and orphans are getting ripped off, you know, they report it to the authorities, and they, you know, make issue news releases and try to get these guys kicked off the air. So the purpose of it is very serious. The purpose that they collect this film footage is very serious, in that they're trying to, like, make sure that these religious fraudsters are brought to justice and everything. But in the course of talking to these guys, they said, "Well, you got to look at blooper reel. You know, when something really funny comes across, you know, we save these clips, and so they didn't just have like a 30-minute reel. They had hours and hours and hours of this stuff. You know, just like just weird stuff that happens on religious TV. And they also told me, they said, did you know there's 1,700 hours a week of original religious TV? And I said, no, you know, that's scary, you know. Yeah. And so they were just, so I was just leaving TNT, and I made up I made a half-hour pilot out of this material. I just, you know, and I called the show God Stuff with Joe Bob Briggs, and it was going to be like, you know, it was going to be like a clip show,
right?
Just a reality clip show about religious TV, and the two producers who were starting the Daily Show saw it, you know, and asked me, "You want to do it for the Daily Show?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." I mean, no one at the time knew what the Daily Show was, and in fact, the term "the Daily Show" was what they were calling it until they could figure out what the name of it was going to be. So they were just calling it the Daily Show because they didn't know what to name it.
Right.
And everyone said it so many times that they finally just said, "Okay, well, we'll just call it the Daily Show." You know?
Yeah.
And so, so I think I did two. I either did 2 or 3 seasons. I can't remember which, but we would pick the best clips and write a little copy around it. And it was the first time that I had to collaborate with other people on the copy, so I was not totally happy about it. But because normally all the stuff I'd ever done on TV, I wrote it and performed it. You know, so but that was fun. They made me use my real name. I wanted to do it as Joe Bob. They said everyone on the Daily Show has to use their real name. I said, it's a comedy show, really? Right. You know, Bobcat Goldthwait has been on this show. I don't think that's his real name.
Right. I hope not. I hope it's not.
So,
just as you know, being a critic as far as movies and stuff, is there a certain guidelines that you need to consider, or is it better to have a shtick like yourself or Cassandra Peterson, or is it better to maybe go like the Siskel and Ebert route, or, you know, because I watched both and I enjoyed watching both you and Elvira and Siskel and Ebert, but what do you think the best route is in your opinion?
Well, my original idea in creating my column and my TV appearances was to be a populist critic, is to be a non-critic critic. So to represent the guy who, you know, the reason I invented the drive-in totals, you know, how many breaths, how many car chases, how many, is that, you know, to try to create a way to evaluate movies that's like for the working Joe guy,
right,
you know, who doesn't really care what the film critic says. Right. He wants the basics about what's going on, and so that was the idea. And out of that idea, everything else evolved. Is that it was a critic who hates critics,
right?
So, and you know, I had my run-ins with regular critics, including Roger Ebert, over that, because you know, in fact, there was a critic named Janet Maslin who was at the New York Times, and she was, you know, I would champion movies that she would think are, you know, are beyond the pale, shouldn't even be shown in theaters.
Right.
We were supposed to actually debate that one night on Nightline, and she backed out. She didn't show. But Roger Ebert didn't like certain films that he thought were degrading to women that I had championed, and he was like very vocal about, you know, calling these movies the equivalent of pornography, even though,
right.
you know, and we got into it a couple times on panels and everything. He had a large Puritan streak in him about certain things, you know. Whereas I think anything goes in the movies. You know, it's like just because you see a woman being abused in a movie doesn't mean the movie sponsors abuse.
Right.
It's
That's
telling
why.
a story, right?
Right. That's why I never understood. Oh, this movie promotes this, this, and this, and it's like, how, you know? Oh, this movie will make people want to do this, and it's like, if someone watches a movie and copies it, they have a problem, not the movie.
Right.
You know?
Well, Roger Ebert said, you know, he claims that he went to a theater where people were cheering on the rapists and I Spit on Your Grave. I don't believe that happened.
Yeah.
I do not
Right.
believe that happened
Yeah.
because it's like one thing that movie one effect that does not have on a male is to make you want to be a rapist. You know, especially when, you know, the main rapist gets his member cut off.
Right.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
I don't think that movie, I don't think you can watch that movie and think, oh, that's what I want to do tomorrow.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
You know, I thought it was more pro woman than anything because, you know, this horrible thing happens to her and then she gets revenge in awesome ways, so you feel like, you know,
Right. The
she's
original
been
name of the
justified.
movie was Day of the Woman. Meyer Zarki, the director, thought it was a feminist movie. There was a guy named Donald Wildman. He was a reverend in Tupelo, Mississippi, who had an organization called Citizens for Decency. And he believed that movies could cause you to go off the deep end and commit crimes. And I was on a panel with the Reverend Wildman one time, and I said, Donnie, if what you say is true, then you should hook me up to a machine, you know, and study what I'm going to do, because I have seen more of those movies than anybody you can name. And so if there's some kind of mechanism that causes you to watch, if you watch these movies, then you become a crazed killer, or you go off the deep end and you start raping women or whatever it is, then I'm the main candidate for the next guy for that to happen, because I have watched so many thousands of these movies, so why don't you arrest me, you know?
Right.
And he never had an answer for that. Now, he blew that off like I was mocking him, or I was making fun of him.
Yeah.
But I was serious about that. If it's really true, then it has to be true for everybody. If it's not true, then there must be some other element, right, that causes guys to, you know.
Go on.
And in fact, whenever they've tried to use that in court as a defense, where the guy said, I was brainwashed by the media, they've thrown it out like immediately. I mean, they won't even hear that. So how can you use it on the other side if it's not it was not worthy of a defense? So,
Absolutely.
So obviously, movies don't cause crimes. I mean, it's like, to me, it's so self-evident. But we constantly have these guys show up and say, you know, the movies are causing the corruption of society, or music. In the case of, you know, in the 80s, we had like rap music is causing crimes in the ghettos, you know, and it wasn't true then. It's not true now. It's not ever going to be true.
Right. Absolutely.
One more question, and then we'll start to wrap up.
All right. Yesterday when we had, it was yesterday we talked to you. You said you're developing your own studio, or you're in the process of doing that. I was just curious.
Yeah, just later this year, we're launching Coney Island Pictures. We're going to make a whole lot of low-budget movies really fast.
Okay. Cool.
And I'm not going to produce. I'm going to produce the movies. I'm not going to write. I'm not going to direct. I'm not going to act.
Okay.
I'm not going to do anything except produce the movies. And a whole lot of really talented, really young, poorly paid people are going to people that are smarter than me, more talented than me, but I'm going to be the mogul.
Okay.
I'm going to be the mini mogul behind the production slate, and we're going to make horror, action, sci-fi, martial arts. I've always been a fan of the high school sex comedy, or high school sex farce, or, you know, there were R-rated films. Everybody tells me don't make those because nobody watches those anymore because there's too much porn and like that sort of like soft sexual humor doesn't really work anymore and everything. I don't think that's true. I think there's always, the plot of those movies was always the same. It's four guys trying to get laid.
Right.
Four guys trying to get laid on spring break, and they go somewhere and they don't ever get laid.
Yep.
They don't get laid.
Yeah.
But a lot of you see a lot of girls in bikinis and a lot of topless girls, and things happen, and they meet a hooker, and and I always liked those stories. I always thought they were fun, and Lloyd Kaufman started his career making those stories, but. They say, no, you want to lose all your money, make one of those, so I don't know if we're going to make those or not, but we're going to make every other exploitation genre.
Okay, cool. Is there a way that we can not promote, but like on our podcast, like know that these movies are coming out and we can bring them up in our...
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, anybody that wants to be involved with the movies, I mean, we are going to be based at Coney Island in Brooklyn.
Oh, cool.
But anybody who wants to write to me at JoeBobBriggs.com that wants to be involved with it, we're going to have quite a few ways that you can be involved with the production of the movies, with the selection of scripts. There's many ways, and we're going to have at least one movie a year that's how everyone talks about crowdfunding.
Yes.
Well, ours is not crowd-funded; it's crowd-created. So it will be a movie that's completely created by. It's hard to explain, but you can sort of volunteer for various jobs on the film.
Okay.
And move up the ranks, and eventually, at least one film a year will be made by the fans and sort of members of Coney Island Pictures, and we use that as our farm system to move people up to more to paid jobs.
Cool.
And so it's as I said, we're going to make a lot of movies. We're not. This is not just a thing where we're like going to go one movie at a time. We're going to be making a whole lot of movies every year.
Awesome.
So
we're getting the time cut here.
Yes.
One more thing before we wrap this up. Is there anything the great Joe Bob Briggs has? Any advice to the hopeless?
Just the drive-in will never die.
There we go.
All right. Well, hey, thank you very much for giving us this time. You're a legend and a big part of my childhood, and it just doesn't get any better than this. So, I appreciate.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I was happy to be here.
Yep.